All right, so we are going to be looking at your next set of notes here, section 1.2. All right, so you should be taking these notes in your notebook along with me here. All right, so the first thing we're looking at today is called the statistical problem solving process. All right, so if these go too fast for you at any point, you can just solve and catch up what you're writing here and then press play to keep going. So the statistical problem solving process consists of four steps. The first step is to ask a question of interest. So this is kind of what we're doing when we encounter any sort of statistical problem. So a question of interest is just any question about a characteristic that varies between individuals. So if you were looking at people as your individual, a question of interest could be, what is the average height? It just can be about any sort of characteristic of those individuals. The next step is to produce data. So to produce data, we would either do an observational study or an experiment. So remember from our 1.1 notes, an observational study is like a survey or something where you're not inflicting any sort of treatment on your subjects or individuals. An experiment would be where you're doing some sort of treatment on your subjects or individuals. The third step is to analyze your data. So this would happen with either a graph or a table or a chart of some sort. And the fourth step is to interpret the results. So this is like what you did in the last activity in those last few problems that you did on your paper then. So I have my graph, what does it tell me? Where are the patterns and the trends? All right, so let's look at an example for these 4 steps in problem solving using the activity that you just did. All right, so the first, number 1, is to ask a question of interest. So a question of interest that we could have for activity 1.2 that you just did is, do people remember better after hearing or seeing? So that's a question that your study could answer after collecting data. Number 2 is to produce the data. So you guys did this when you ran the experiment with the numbers on the index card. So that was the data you collected to try and see if people remember better after hearing or seeing. The third step is to analyze the data, and you guys did this by making a dot plot. So you looked at the class data, you had all the differences, and you made a dot plot of all of those differences. All right, the last step is to interpret your results. So without looking at your results, I won't really be able to interpret them, but you can fill in here, we determined. So what did you write for those number 9 and 10 on the activity? Did you have a lot of scores around 0 where a lot of people were the same? Maybe you had some that were more positive numbers, which means we could see better or remember better after seeing. If you had a lot of negative numbers, that would mean you remember better after hearing. All right, the next 2 slides here we're going to look at are problems in your book. So you should grab your book here, go ahead and pause if you need to, and turn to page 27. And go ahead and look at problem 132. So problem 132 says, according to the National Institute on Media and the Family, a preschooler's risk of obesity jumps 6% for every hour of television watched per day. So they're saying the more television a child watches, the greater chance they have of being obese. The risk increases by 31% if the TV is in their bedroom. So part A asks us, what would be a reasonable question of interest in this case? So a question of interest just has to ask a question about the study that they did. So when I look at this, I see that they're talking about watching TV and the child's health or obesity. So my question of interest I came up with is, does watching TV increase childhood obesity? So I'm just asking a question that would pertain to the study that they did, the data that they collected. Part B then asks, do you think these results were obtained using an observational study or an experiment, and why? So I think this is an observational study. They probably went to these families and surveyed, so they would have to know things like how much TV do you watch, and then the weight of the child in the house. Okay, so there wouldn't be any treatment given there if they were just doing a survey, so it couldn't be an experiment. That would make this an observational study. Part C then says the actual study that produced these results involved 2,761 low-income adults in New York with children ages 1 through 4. Who were the individuals in this study and what variables were measured? So the individuals were who they were collecting information about. So the individuals would be the children, and more specifically, the children of only these adults here. So I'm going to say the individuals are the children of the 2,761 low-income adults. So that's who they collected information about. So they would be our individuals. The variables then would be the specific information that they collected about the children. So they collected two pieces of information. Their TV viewing habits, so how much TV they're watching, and also the health of the children, so measuring whether or not they are obese. Okay, we're also going to look at number 133, just part A on that page. So there's a problem like this in your assignment, so I wanted to make sure you had something similar to compare it to. So 133 says, which paper towel brand absorbs best? Samantha, a 12-year-old, carried out a science project to compare the absorbency of 4 brands of paper towels: Bounty, Scott, Sparkle, and Western Family. She started with 4 individual sheets of each brand. At one at a time, Samantha placed a sheet of paper towel in a container with 200 milliliters of water. After 15 seconds, she removed the paper towel from the water and squeezed out as much water as she could into a graduated cylinder. So she's just measuring how much water she could squeeze out. Samantha then determined the amount of water that had been absorbed. And here are the data. So 4 different types of paper towel, and she measured 4 times for each brand. So looking at part A, it says identify 2 sources of variation in this study. That's the part we're looking at. So variation is just things that are different. To vary just means to change or to be different. So if I think about you guys in this class, things that would vary would be like your height. So you aren't all the same height, so that's something that varies. It changes from person to person. So when I'm looking at the paper towel here, 2 sources of variation, I want to think about what are things that are different. So one thing that would be different would be the paper towel brands, right? They're not all the same brand. So that's kind of looking at the different columns in the table, or I'm sorry, the rows of the table. If I look at the columns in the table that they give me, so for example, that first row, it's all Bounty, but those are 4 different pieces of paper towel. So the other variation would be 4 towels of each brand. So because each towel won't be exactly the same, even though it's the same brand. They're not identical completely. So those would be the sources of variation, because it's things that are different from one individual paper towel to another. So their brands vary, and also there are 4 different towels of each brand. All right, so you guys are working now on your 1.2 assignment that your sub will put up on the board for you.